So tonight I'd like to talk a little bit or share about a story that is in the suttas. And I think that, at least for me, and actually I know for a number of people that I've spoken with, it has some important or meaningful or helpful messages in it or something like this. So it's a story about this person named Prince Bodhi, who is a prince, not surprisingly, and the Buddha. And Prince Bodhi, he had built a new building. It's like they call it a long house, which I guess was not uncommon in that time in ancient India. It's just like it sounds, a long building in which people would stay. And Prince Bodhi named it the Pink Lotus Longhouse. And I just had this thought, like right as Jim was ringing the bell, Pink Lotus Longhouse. I thought, if I ever open a restaurant, it just kind of has like a nice sound to it. So I don't think I will ever be opening a restaurant, but if I were. So Prince Bodhi had built this Pink Lotus Longhouse, and he invited the Buddha and his monastics to come and to have a meal there. And the Buddha agreed. And so Prince Bodhi at his own house has oversees and has all the food prepared for the Buddha. This is very common at this time, that somebody would like oversee the preparing. We don't know how many monastics, but it could have been a lot. So it might have been like a big deal to make all this food. So he makes this food, and then Prince Bodhi is waiting outside his house when the Buddha and his monastics show up. So Prince Bodhi kind of welcomes, pays homage to the Buddha, and says, please, after you, let's go to the Pink Lotus Longhouse. So the Buddha walks to the Pink Lotus Longhouse, and Prince Bodhi and all the other monastics are behind them, and I guess they're bringing the food. And they get there, it's not too far away, and Prince Bodhi had put this white cloth that went through the whole of the building and then down the front steps. Maybe we could think of the red carpet treatment is kind of what I was thinking. And the Buddha walks up to it, and he stops before he gets to this white cloth. And Prince Bodhi says, "Venerable Sir, please step on the white cloth so that it may be for my welfare and happiness for a long time." And the Buddha just stands there. He doesn't step on the cloth. He doesn't say anything. He's just standing there. Prince Bodhi, a second time, "Venerable Sir, please step on the white cloth so that it may be for my welfare and happiness for a long time." The Buddha's still just standing there. He's a patient guy, right? So he's just standing there. Doesn't say anything. He doesn't step on the cloth. And the third time, Prince Bodhi says, "Venerable Sir, please step on the white cloth." We don't know, right? This is a little my embellishment of the story, of course. But so that it may be for my welfare and happiness for a long time. So Prince Bodhi somehow is really invested in the Buddha stepping on this white cloth. And we don't know exactly what Prince Bodhi was thinking, but he clearly has this idea that it would be helpful if the Buddha would step on this cloth. It would be for his welfare and happiness for a long time. And somehow I was kind of thinking about this. It's not unusual. Sometimes we have this secret wish, if only something out there would shift and change and be different, or somebody else would do something, then I would be happy. Then my life would go right. Kind of waiting for somebody or something else out there in our external life to be different. Kind of in some ways expecting, somebody else to make us happy, and kind of issuing the responsibility we might have. So Prince Bodhi is kind of like this. So after the third time that he asks, the Buddha looks over at Ananda. Ananda is his assistant and his cousin, his attendant, I should say. He looks over at Ananda, doesn't say anything, just looks over at Ananda. And Ananda, I give Ananda a lot of credit. And what Ananda does, he says, "Fold up the cloth, Prince. The Buddha will not step on the white cloth. He has compassion for future generations." So I like that Ananda doesn't chastise Prince Bodhi or doesn't say anything like that, or doesn't say the Buddha, like, what? Why are you looking at me? What do you want me to do? But instead, like, Ananda understood that, okay, if the Buddha's been asked 3 times and he still doesn't do it, it means he's just not going to do it. And so Ananda says, well, fold up the cloth. The Buddha's not going to step on it. And then he adds, the Buddha has compassion for future generations. Ananda understood what was happening, that if the Buddha had stepped on the cloth and Prince Bodhi said, yay, this is going to be for my happiness and welfare for a long time, then that would kind of like undermine this idea of practice. And people would think that, oh yeah, just the way to have some happiness in your life is to get somebody else to do something for you. And it's also a way that kind of, if in the future somebody were to, let's say, if the Buddha had stepped on the cloth and Prince Bodhi did have a great life, what would happen if in the future a monastic stepped on a white cloth and somebody didn't have happiness afterwards? That would like undermine the whole monastic community, undermine the whole idea of practice. So this just doesn't work, this whole idea. Just find a Buddha, get him to step on a cloth and you'll be fine. Turns out it doesn't work this way, even if you have the good fortune to meet a Buddha. So then we're getting back to the sutta. The prince says, so the prince, he had the cloth folded up and he prepared the seats where all the monastics were going to sit. And then Prince Bodhi, he offered food by himself, which is kind of a big deal. You know, he's royalty and usually he has servants doing these kind of things. But he himself, Prince Bodhi, offers food to the monastics. And they eat and then they have their fill. And then afterwards, he has a little conversation with the Buddha, and he says, pleasure is only gained through pain. This is what Prince Bodhi says to the Buddha. Pleasure is only gained through pain. You can only have something good if you suffer for it. And now it kind of like makes sense why Prince Bodhi wants the Buddha to step on the cloth, because Prince Bodhi thinks to practice is going to be painful. In order to get to have a better life or have something that's pleasurable or find more freedom, more ease, more peace, you have to do something really painful. So Prince Bodhi is saying pleasure is only gained through pain. And so then the Buddha responds, well, before my awakening, I also thought that pleasure is only gained through pain. And then in order to make the point, the Buddha gives a little bit of his autobiography, why the Buddha himself, before he was awakened, kind of like thought that, okay, pain is a part of practice, a necessary part of practice. Many of you know the story of the Buddha's awakening. He leaves the palace that he was living in and goes to practice. He wants to find freedom, find peace. And he practices with some esteemed meditation masters, discovers some meditation, how to meditate, but didn't find peace and freedom there. So he went from one teacher to a second teacher, and then he said, well, maybe some austerities, some really intense austerities, asceticism is needed. That's the way to find freedom. And this is where the Buddha is saying, yeah, I used to think that pain was the way to freedom. So he said, the Buddha is telling this story to Prince Bodhi, and he says, after he had left the teachers, he said, seeking the state of supreme peace, I set out to discover what is skillful. So if this meditation isn't going to work, what is? And then the Buddha says, traveling, I came to Sanangama and Uavela, and there I saw this delightful grove, a lovely piece of ground with a clear flowing river and pleasant smooth banks, and nearby was a village for alms. So an ideal location to practice. Water, food, and it was a pleasant place. Then the Buddha speaking, he said, so having found this lovely place, I sat down and I thought, this is a good place for endeavoring, for practicing, striving, working, applying myself. And the Buddha says, why don't I, with teeth clenched and tongue pressed against the roof of my mouth, squeeze, squash, and crush mind with mind? Like a strong person would grab a weaker person by the head or throat and squeeze, squash, or crush them. So that's what I did until sweat poured from my armpits. This is quite something, right? He's like really in there striving. Mind crushing mind. This idea like, okay, I don't know exactly what awakening is or how to get there, but I'm going to force my mind to do something. There's no details here exactly what that was. But just like through force of will with his mind. So then he says, my energy was roused up and unflagging, and my mindfulness was established and lucid, but my body was disturbed and not tranquil because I pushed too hard with that painful striving. So the Buddha is recognizing this crush mind with mind doesn't work. And then the Buddha continues, and then I thought, well, why don't I practice the breathing less meditation, to not breathe, holding one's breath. So I cut off breathing through my mouth and nose, but violent winds cut through my head, like a strong person was drilling into my head with a strong point. My energy was roused up and unflagging, and my mindfulness was established and lucid, but my body was disturbed and not tranquil because I pushed too hard with that painful striving. So here's a second practice that the Buddha did. It didn't. He couldn't find freedom that way. And then he includes, there's a few more ascetic practices that he did, and they all say, well then, it didn't work. And it was quite painful, and I didn't become awakened. And they all end with this, my energy was roused up and unflagging, and my mindfulness was established and lucid. So he had energy, and he had mindfulness, but he was just exhausting himself. So then he says, after he describes a number of ascetic practices he had done, he said, whatever spiritual adepts have experienced, those painful, sharp, severe, acute feelings due to overexertion, no one has done more than me. So just saying, I did everything that's humanly possible. Describing starving himself, all these kinds of things. And then he says, that he had a different idea, like, okay, clearly those meditation masters didn't work, this asceticism didn't work, so there has to be a third way. And many of you will know this is kind of like the middle way between this asceticism and indulgences, and this is like the road of practice. Then he found the Bodhi tree, another pleasant place to practice. Eventually sits down and becomes awakened. Right? That's all kind of the story about how that happens. So the Buddha is telling this story to Prince Bodhi, kind of to say like, look, I really tried this painful thing and it didn't lead to pleasure. It led to this exhaustion and due to my overexertion and straining and striving. And it wasn't until, that Buddha went another way, that this third way between the extremes of indulgence and austerities, but the way to practice, The way that the Buddha described it, his own practice, doesn't mean everybody has to do this, but his own practice included the jhanas. These are meditative states that are quite pleasurable. So instead it was actually through pleasure that he found his way towards awakening. So as that pleasure is, and happiness and joy, these are integral parts of practice. Right? Many of you might know the 7 factors of awakening include happiness and joy and concentration, including the jhanas. It doesn't have to be the jhanas, but often is. So then, after he tells all this to Prince Bodhi, so then Prince Bodhi says, well, when a person has the Buddha as the teacher, right, because the Buddha did this without a teacher, so he had to try all these things and discover what didn't work. So Prince Bodhi says, oh, well, now that you know that it works, it's got to be easier. So Prince Buddha says, when a person has a Buddha as the trainer, how long does it take to become awakened? Right? We don't blame him for asking this question, right? I think all of us would ask these questions. Is it going to be hard, and how long is it going to take? I think we ask this about so many things in our lives, right? Am I going to do this? How hard is it going to be? And what is it going to take? And the Buddha replies with a question to the prince. Instead of saying right away, he asks the prince a question. Prince Bodhi, are you skilled in the art of wielding a hooked goad while riding an elephant? I don't know exactly what a hooked goad is, but it's something that one does when they're riding an elephant. Prince Bodhi, here's a skill that you have. Or do you have this particular skill? And Prince Bodhi says, yes, I am skilled in that. So the Buddha asks him some questions. Well, suppose a person were to come to you, Prince Bodhi, and asked you to train them in working with an elephant with a hooked goad. If that person did not have any confidence, could they achieve what could be achieved if they did have confidence? No. Well, are you am I saying that the negative, right? If they didn't have any confidence, you can't achieve what you could achieve if you did have confidence. Kind of makes sense, right? And then the Buddha says, if that person had no vitality, could they achieve what a person who had vitality could achieve? No. If that person were dishonest and had no integrity, could they achieve what an honest person with an integrity could achieve? No. If a person had energy, did not have energy, could they achieve what a person with energy could achieve? No. If that person were unwise, could they achieve what a person with wisdom could achieve? No. So the Buddha has outlined 5 qualities here, and Prince Bodhi is saying, wow, if that person had even one of those qualities, they could train under me, like one of those 5. If they had confidence, vitality, integrity, energy, and wisdom, they could practice under, they could learn from Prince Bodhi. And then the Buddha says, well, these are these 5 factors of endeavoring. This is a list. And the Buddha's teachings that we don't talk about as much, but I think it's such an interesting list. Because this is a common question, like how much effort to apply? And what does effort look like? And is that the only thing that's needed? Because sometimes when we get stuck, we feel like, okay, I just have to push harder. I just have to do the same thing, but more. I've did a lot of that in my early practice. And I tried to crush mind with mind. I didn't know that expression, but I somehow thought that I had to make my mind be a certain way. And there was this tension, and I would like meditate with like this, this kind of a thing, just really trying to strain and strive. It didn't work. It didn't work. For me, one of the times when I really started to feel like there was some movement, some real movement in my meditation practice, was this time when I had some physical difficulties, and so I had to lay down. I couldn't meditate sitting up. It was quite something, because you can't strain. It's hard to strain as much like when you're lying down. And I just realized, oh, this is a whole different way to practice, still with this commitment to practice, with some diligence and some sincerity, but without the tightness and the straining. I just felt kind of like a deepening and a letting go and a settling that started to point the way, like, oh, this is the direction to go, not this real straining and striving that I had been doing. And to be sure, the teachers had been telling me, Diana, back off, you're a little too tight. And I was like, what do they know? Like this worked for everything else in my life. If you just have to work really hard. Because it's true, right? For some things in our life, working hard really is the right way. To get through school, sometimes it's a lot of work. To have difficult conversations with people so that you can really allow your relationship to grow and mature, it's a lot of work. Sometimes jobs are a lot of work, to work with difficult people, or maybe they're taxing in all kinds of different ways, deadlines. So this idea of pushing is familiar to us because it works in so many areas of our lives. It doesn't work the same way in meditation. We need a certain amount of effort, but it only goes as far as it goes. It'll work until it doesn't, kind of thing. So I'd like to unpack a little bit this 5 factors of endeavoring, 5 factors of applying oneself, 5 factors of working, 5 factors of, I'll just maybe say it. Endeavoring is kind of an odd word, endeavoring, working. But something for anything you want to do, and practice. This is being applied to practice, but anything you want to do. Confidence, vitality, integrity, energy, wisdom. Confidence. It makes a difference whether you think the task you're embarking on is even possible. I don't think that I can fly. I am not practicing flying, right? Because I just don't think that it's possible. So you have to have a certain confidence that it is possible. And maybe even this goes without saying, but sometimes it can be worthwhile to, investigate. Do we have confidence that A, it's possible to find greater peace, ease, freedom, happiness, well-being? Do we think that's possible for us in this lifetime? And do we think that we have the capabilities? You do have the capabilities. If you're sitting in this room, you have the capabilities. And I'll go over that a little bit more here, but just so confidence, right? It's kind of like it sometimes goes without saying, but a certain amount of confidence is needed. And it's not an accident that this is the first item in the list. Right? We have to kind of believe, this is possible. And humans can do it, and I can do it. And so the Buddha, he also says, this whole idea of confidence, I'm sorry, I missed over a part, but that's okay. So this also gets this word sada in Pali. Dharma teacher Pali would say sada, but if you're Pali is sada, and it often gets translated as conviction. So like just this, yes, this is possible, or faith. But often when we hear the word faith, many of us think about this unverified belief, just beliefs you have to adopt, and that's not what's being pointed to here. It's the faith that greater peace, freedom, and ease is possible. Maybe you haven't experienced it yet, but this idea that more is possible. That's what's being pointed to here, is faith. And then vitality. This sense of just like having some enough, maybe like energy or consciousness or awakeness. And it can be just enough vitality to just hear a Dharma talk. Maybe it's not even like coming to a place, driving to IMC, but maybe there's even people on YouTube who are lying down in bed listening because they're ill, and that's all they can do. And that's all that's needed. It's just this vitality, just enough to be able to just be aware of what's happening. There's a sutta where the Buddha is sick, and he is laying down, he's very sick. And somebody comes to him and chants the 7 factors of awakening to him. And this is what was kind of like needed for the Buddhas to maybe have some more energy. And maybe that was all that at that time when he was really sick he was capable of. So the sense of vitality, it's not asking a lot from us. But maybe this idea of being able to take in some information and process it. Sometimes when we're in extreme pain, we can't do that, or we can't do that. So maybe vitality is also pointing to a certain amount of wherewithal, maybe. But I would also say that it's enough vitality also to understand, okay, some things are supportive for my practice and some things are not supportive. I think all of us, when we've been injured or sick, we all have noticed that if we get riled up and filled with hatred and rage towards the sickness or the injury or someone else or some institution, or just getting filled with hatred and rage, does not, in the long run, make us feel better. Any pain that we have does not go away. It just becomes more acute. Instead, it's when we can open and relax as best we can, in whatever way is available to us at that time, as opposed to just, being filled with rage or hatred. So the vitality is being pointed to is to recognize this, just to know this, oh yeah, when I hate that this is happening to me, makes it worse. If I'm able to say, okay, this is what my life is like at this moment, be able to turn towards it as best we can, then it's better. So the type of vitality is pointing to recognize that it doesn't mean that you can stop the hatred and rage, right then. This is a natural reaction. A lot of humans have this, of course. When we have injuries or we're really sick. So I want to be careful here, because sometimes this Pali word is literally it's a papado, gets translated as little, like oppression, like there's little of anything that's holding you down. So it's not, you're not being held down too much. And apatanko is also kind of like the sickness isn't too much. That's what these words that I'm translating as vitality. Sometimes people use this word health. And then you start to get this feeling like, but I'm not healthy. Because the Dharma world is filled with people who found their way to the Dharma because of sickness, because of illness. And I can imagine it would be demoralizing to hear, like, wait, I have to be healthy, but I'm not. So it's more about vitality, just having a certain enough kind of energy there. So confidence, vitality, and then integrity is the third one. And this is related to not being deceitful, not being fraudulent, not being devious, but instead to be forthright, to be open, to be honest, to be authentic. That's also what's being asked as part of this quality of endeavoring. And in the suttas, it points to, in particular, to be open and honest with one's teachers or companions in the spiritual life. It's kind of the language that's used. So there's a way in which we might want people to think the best of us. I know when I was practicing, I kind of wanted the teachers to like me and think I was a good student. And so, I was reluctant to show them all the ways that I was struggling. And that's normal, right? I think all humans, we do this often. We want to kind of like give our best impression. But this is pointing to, like, you can do this, you can tell the things that are going well, but in order for people to really be able to support you, they need to know where you really are struggling. And in order to know where you're struggling, there needs to be some authenticity and some honesty. Doesn't mean that you have to tell everybody all the time and be worn on your sleeve, but people on the path with you or your teacher to be able to say, this is what's going on. And I would say it's most helpful to say kind of like what's going well and where the struggles are. Kind of like the full picture. Kind of like this forthrightness, this honesty and this openness. So that's the third quality, is integrity. The fourth one is energy. So the energy the energy here is the one that's related to right effort on the Eightfold Path, if you're familiar with the Eightfold Path. And this points to the energy to not only recognize that, for example, feeling hatred or rage towards not feeling well isn't helpful, or that to recognize that having a little bit more ease or openness towards what's actually happening in the moment is helpful. The energy is pointing to having the intention, kind of like this, okay, I want to turn away from the hatred and rage that is a habit and I find myself falling into and getting overwhelmed with. I want to see if I can turn away, for example. So that takes energy to even set that intention. Okay, I can see this isn't helping me. Is there another way? And the energy is pointing to that. Cultivating what is helpful and letting go what isn't helpful. This is what the energy is about. And for some people, it's just to be able to recognize. Initially, it's just to be able to recognize, okay, I can't help myself, but I know this isn't the way that's helpful. And to set the intention to be able to go another way that is helpful. So the energy is about this. And then the last one is wisdom. And the wisdom is pointed to here in a particular way. It's defined in a particular way. It's about recognizing that experiences arise and pass away. They come and they go. They're impermanent, they are inconstant, they are not steady. Everything, all of our experiences arise and pass away. And having this, like seeing this, having this wisdom, like really understanding this, does a number of things, including it helps us to put our priorities in order, like, okay, things aren't going to last forever. Nothing lasts forever. Doesn't mean that this particular ailment I have. I'm really focusing on sickness here, but this works for people who are healthy as well. Doesn't mean that this is going to go away, or doesn't mean it's not going away. It means that maybe it fluctuates in its intensity. This love that I feel for somebody doesn't mean it's necessarily going to go away, but it's going to change. It's going to have seasons. Of course it is, just like everything. So recognizing that helps us to put things into priority. Maybe we're not going to live for, maybe recognizing that we're not going to live forever helps us to say, okay, this is what's important, and maybe it's not so important to prove to others that I'm right all the time, or to correct them when they do things wrong, or something like that. So there's a way this impermanence might help us put our priorities, kind of shift our priorities when we recognize we're not going to live forever, and what we're experiencing is not going to last always. It's going to wax and wane and maybe disappear. We don't know. Impermanence also, of course, helps us to recognize this is where growth and development, cultivation is another way of saying impermanence. It means things are changing. So there's a way that we can say, oh yeah, just like this is changing, this uncomfortable feeling in my knee, and the same way my ability to sit still for however long is changing too. So impermanence also, right, is this idea that things grow and develop. And then maybe a third thing that I'll just say about impermanence here is it just doesn't make sense to hold on to things that are changing, that are inconstant and are going away, coming and leaving. So there's just naturally a certain amount of letting go that happens. So I believe this is why wisdom is like the fifth element in these 5 factors of endeavoring. Confidence, vitality, integrity, energy and wisdom. So then after the Buddha gives this talk to Prince Bodhi, remember he asked, well, how long? How long is it going to take to become awakened? And the Buddha answers him. He says, I have to get back to this so I can kind of quote here. He says, oh my goodness, I have to go back a number of pages here. So after the Buddha, he had gave Prince Bodhi these confidence, vitality, integrity, energy, and wisdom, these 5 of endeavoring. And then he says, if a person has these 5 factors of endeavoring, they can realize the supreme end of the spiritual path in 7 years. But let alone 7 years, they could realize the supreme end of the spiritual path in 6 years. Well, let alone 6 years. If you have these, you can do it in 5 years. Let alone 5 years. If you have these 5 factors, you can do it in 4 years. Let alone 4 years. You can do this 3 years, 2 years, 1 year. Let alone 1 year, 7 months. Let alone 7 months, 6 months. 5 months, 4 months. Right? The Buddha just keep on going down, right? 2 months, 1 month. 7 days. You know where this is going, right? 6 days. Let alone 6 days, one can realize the supreme end of the spiritual path in 5 days. Let alone 5 days, 4 days, 3 days, 2 days. And then he says, let alone 1 day. One can be instructed in the morning and achieve awakening by the evening. And the Prince Bodhi is delighted, and he says, oh, Buddha, the teachings, how well this explains the teachings, that one can be instructed in the morning and achieve awakening in the evening. And then someone that's standing near Prince Bodhi says to him, yeah, though you speak like this, Prince Bodhi, you don't go for refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, right? He's not taking the Buddha as his teacher. And then Prince Bodhi says, oh, don't say that. I've heard and learned the teachings in the presence of my mother. When she was pregnant with me, she took refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And then when I was really young and I had a wet nurse, they carried me to the where the Buddha was, and the wet nurse took refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And then I can imagine everybody's going, that doesn't count. Then Prince Bodhi, he finally says, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So this is the story of somebody who's trying to figure out, like, how much work do I need to do? Like, how long is it going to take? How much work needs to be done? And I think the Buddha, he's pointing to, it's not just about straining and striving, because he tried that, it didn't work. Instead, to think about this confidence or vitality or integrity. Maybe these are some things for us to think about. Do we have confidence that we can have some more happiness, health, well-being, and peace and freedom? And if not, is there something that we might do? Are we being open and honest with those people that could help us and support us in this practice, sharing our struggles as well as what's doing well? And I would say sometimes we have friends that we just struggle with, we complain about how hard it is. Maybe being forthright and is to say, these things are going well. And then having the energy to say, I want to cultivate what's helpful and skillful. And then the wisdom to recognize, yeah, things change. They're always changing. And this is how one can find the way towards awakening to greater peace, freedom, and ease. So Prince Bodhi, and maybe I'll say for those of you who don't know, Bodhi means awakening. And this for me has been a real head scratcher. Why is he called Prince Awakening when he's the one who doesn't really want to practice? So I don't know, this might be something too. Maybe there's a secret meaning there that I don't know. But so thank you for your attention, and I'd like to open it up to some questions and comments.